Hey guys, welcome to Irish Medieval History, and today we're basically having a chat or a review perhaps of the Northman. It's kind of funny to call it review because I'm not going to go completely through the movie from beginning to end. Of course, this will have spoilers. I want to talk about it. I've seen the movie now twice. I've seen the movie the first time with my wife, and I have just seen the movie again just there with Denton. Myself and Denton watched the movie together because we will be going live doing a Q&A on the Northman. Was it this weekend on the 22nd of May. Regardless, you guys asked me a good few times to review the movie, and I was a bit like, yeah, maybe, perhaps. And then I finally seen the movie with my wife, and wow, I really did enjoy this movie. It definitely is one of my favorite movies of all time. There's a lot to unpack with this movie. It is a very deep movie. A lot of people turned around and said it was weird, and I understand where people are coming from. I know where they're coming from. It is a lot to digest. I have loads and loads of pages on notes on this movie. The first time I watched it, I just kind of enjoyed it with my wife, and I gotta say, the second time I watched it with Denton, I actually enjoyed it even more because from the beginning to end, there is so much information hitting you. Even if you're used to early medieval literature or even a casual film buff, you're going to get bombarded with information. There is a lot of Easter eggs. There's a lot of information that your brain is going to be bombarded with the first time around. So I definitely would advise, don't just watch this movie once. Watch it a few times and actually watch it from different angles. Watch it the first time to enjoy the movie, but then watch it a few times to take it from different perspectives, because it's a lot for your brain to take on. And I can see why people said it was weird and it just wasn't for them, and it kind of flopped in the box office because it's not a movie for the casual person, and there's a lot of reasons why. First and foremost, to start this movie off, I'd like to highlight the fact that this is a Irish medieval YouTube channel, and therefore I don't really cover or specialize in modern politics. And I find a lot of people, they feel that I have some kind of agenda that influences their political sphere on the other side of the world. And to me, and you have to take it from my perspective now, when you write these big massive comments saying that I have offended you and that I should know better, you have to remember I live on a small island just off of Britain, right, called Ireland. And I recently moved to Japan, and I'm trying to take on the culture and the politics here that affects me and the bills that I pay. Well, it's mostly my wife who pays most of the bills, but regardless, I'm trying to take on different cultures here. And when I have somebody from a country that I've been to on holidays maybe a few times, or even parts of the world I've never been to, and they're going on about modern politics, I be honest with you, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, it literally, I read these big chunks and I look up the information that I need to look up, and then I'm like, this has nothing to do with the video that I have made. And I just want to highlight that. And the reason why I want to highlight that is it's very important, because even from the get-go, before this movie was made, Robert Egger was put off by making this movie simply because he knew that people would look at it from a modern perspective, a modern political perspective, and that's not what Robert wanted to make here. In fact, if you take a step back and look at the purpose of what this movie is, and this movie is about a man called Hamlet, who goes off to Iceland, and who spends 2 hours of this movie harassing a farmer. That's what the movie is. Like, the movie is him going off to the middle of nowhere in Iceland, not to the nice parts of Iceland. You do see here and there nice little bits of Iceland, but for most of the movie, it's not the nicest parts of Iceland. And he spends that movie harassing his uncle for killing his father way back when, right? 20 years ago. And that's what this movie is. And thank God as well, because that's what Robert Eggers wanted to make. And yet, a lot of people have turned around and made a big deal about there being no African people in this movie. An early medieval movie, and people are, have taken political views on this, modern political views, and that's kind of the problem, is that, and it's not just a new problem, it's always a problem that people take it from their own modern view, and then they look at something from the medieval era in particular from a modern view, and that's not how you should look at medieval history, and it's also not how you should look at my videos. I do my best to try to explain the information from a modern perspective, but you always need to take off your modern glasses, and that's the exact same thing with the Northman. The Northman is a modern movie that takes a lot from early medieval literature and archaeology finds. This is the style of Robert Eggers. He does this with a lot of his movies. He, even to the fact of hand sewn equipment, he does that. Clothing, equipment, boats, the whole shebang. It's all made from scratch and as authentic as it possibly can be. And this movie is it. This is why I love the movie so much, is the level of detail was absolutely amazing for the whole thing. And I thought it was interesting that no historian turned around and said it was historically inaccurate. It was just I disagreed with Robert Eggers' interpretation of a lot of the stuff. And that's really important. And I feel at this point, after going through all the evidence that... by the way, this review is almost like a week late compared to everyone else's reviews. In fact, almost a month late. So I have seen many different reviews. I haven't seen everyone's reviews, but I've seen many reviews, and I've read different academics actually writing about this, having podcasts about this. So I've listened to various people, and I've taken on a lot of information. And what's very interesting is that people turn around and saying that I actually disagree with Robert Eggers' interpretation. That's what many people are saying from a historical point of view. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I thought there was many traps that a lot of historians and archaeologists, so on and so forth, fell into when reviewing this movie from their perspective. Because this movie, in fact, is all about interpretation. Many people who reviewed this from a movie perspective noticed that this movie screamed at them, your interpretation. And that's vitally important, because a lot of people turned around and disagreed with the usage of wolves, sheep, and birds. Now, I don't specialize in movies whatsoever, okay? I did touch on a wee bit of it when I was a teenager, going into drama and so on and so forth, but I don't specialize in it. So when they say that wolf, sheep, and birds are used from a movie perspective as Easter eggs, it goes past my head. But the point I want to make is that this isn't just from a early medieval perspective. Robert Eggers in here has purposely put in Easter eggs for other movie buffs to enjoy. One of which, and I found it very interesting, is that there is a scene very early on in the movie, in fact around about the start of it, after Amlet's father has been killed and he's going back to save his mother, that he's trying to make an escape. And in that, he puts a red hood on, and it is exactly scene by scene similar to Schindler's List, when you have the girl in the red dress making her way about. And this has been taken out from a movie perspective many times during the movie, and I just thought that was really interesting. Another thing Robert Eggers does throughout the entire movie is using early medieval literature from an interpretive point of view, his interpretation, and then mixing it in from a movie perspective as well. So the whole thing, and he outright said it himself that he wanted to get this and take it from a perspective, a interpretation point of view, because you have to remember, you spend the whole movie taking it from Amlet's point of view, and Amlet's point of view is very dark and grim. And a lot of people who were covering outfits turned around and said that they wished the movie was more lighter, so that way we could see the full colourful view of the different shades of colour. Anyone I've spoken to that covers outfits and clothing says this. In fact, I think it's the Welsh Viking has a video, and in this he said that he wished he'd seen, for his own enjoyment, a movie where the filter was taken out, the grey filter that's in this movie. And yeah, I agree, I would love to see this movie with no filter, but as a movie in itself, with its own art and beauty, it would ruin it. You would then see, obviously, the absolute natural beauty of the Viking world, which I am in love with as well, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, the movie for what it is would then be spited and ruined. What else do we have in here? The usage of funerals is also very interesting in this movie as well. Something obviously you see, I don't specialize in Icelandic funerals, and that's something I have to highlight as well, is that this is taken from a Irish historian's point of view. Someone who doesn't, by the way, have a doctorate or a master's or anything in it. I've done university for a good few years, and I do plan on returning. But of course, I went into university to get into tourism, and with the tourism industry doing so well right now, you can see where I'm at in my life. Regardless, this is taken from an Irish perspective, and I did think that it was very interesting, and I'll get on to people's usage of information later on. But Irish funerals, I thought was funny. I noticed a lot of people said it may be inaccurate. If it's from an Irish point of view, and you do see a lot of Irish influences in Iceland, it's mostly burials. The Irish Vikings, the Hiberno Scandinavians, are more into burying their dead, and the reason for it is to kind of highlight the fact that this is the burial spot of my ancestors. So the Irish will never burn a body. They're always about burying the body. And from my perspective, from what little Scandinavian sources I've personally gone through that has influenced Irish literature and vice versa, Irish literature influencing the Scandinavian world, it is very much like, okay, we're going to put our ancestor here because this is our land. And the Irish do the same thing. You will literally have mounds, and in that the ancestors are buried there, and then it's highlighted, mostly buried in the center, and there it is highlighted that this is the burial ground of our ancestors. So to burn bodies is quite funny. Perhaps maybe only a Swedish influence, but I know a lot of people are very much stuck into Scandinavian. I'm going to cover this now. People are very much stuck into Scandinavian literature and from Scandinavian point of views. And I think from a movie that starts off in Eastern Europe, it's a bit funny. In the start of the movie, he starts off around Eastern Europe and the Slavic area, and perhaps this is where I should have started. Regardless, in this, the very start of the movie, it is taking from the point of view of Scandinavians coming in and attacking, and so therefore a lot of people take from Scandinavian sources, which I think when people are reviewing this is slightly wrong. I think people should go more in depth with Slavic literature and openly admit, hey, look, I don't specialize in Slavic literature, so this is my perspective. Instead, a lot of people are taking it from, oh, the Vikings aren't that bad, or the Vikings aren't that, violent. And so I was very surprised to see a lot of even academics turn around and criticize this movie for being too violent. And that some people even went ahead and forward and said that, in fact, you wouldn't even see that level of violence in the 21st century. And I'm like, okay. I let the viewers judge that to a certain degree. And I have to scream this. I don't know. I disagree with that. There is a lot of violence in the 21st century. A lot of violence. And we just need to turn on the TV to see all that. When it comes down to the 5th century and what this channel is about, I will have to turn around and say, no. No. There is a lot of violence in Ireland at the time. And perhaps not in Scandinavian literature too much. From what I've read in Icelandic literature that does influence Ireland, there's a lot of violence inside there as well, with a lot of blood feuds. I don't specialize in Icelandic literature, but from what I've read and gone through, it's quite violent, and still not as violent as what I've seen in Irish literature. And even on top of that, Norse Gaelic contacts in the Viking world, even the Norwegians say, hey, look, the Irish are quite violent. So maybe the Irish are more violent. I don't specialize in Scandinavian literature, so I can't really turn around and tell you that Scandinavian literature is PC, or it's it's not as violent as Irish literature. But what I've come across in Irish literature, that I think people should look at Slavic literature before saying that it's a bit too violent, is the fact that in Irish literature you have Vikings, Norse Vikings by the way, who kidnap a monk, tie him to a rock and stone him to death. This isn't Irish Vikings, this isn't Danish Vikings, this is Norse Vikings kidnapping a monk and then stoning him to death. And don't get me wrong, the Gaul Gael are equally, and a lot of sources say, even Irish sources by the way, say that the Irish Vikings are even worse, even more violent. And I do believe in this, which is also very strange, because a lot of YouTubers online are turning around and saying, oh, the Vikings aren't really, they treat their thralls or slaves with complete kindness, they really look after them, they really care for them. No. There is no love lost between slaves in Dublin, at least, and their masters. It is a very violent, horrible relationship. To begin with, a lot of people say that Viking raiders from Dublin had consensual enjoyment with their slaves. Where did you get that from? I have no idea. It is quite obvious that there is no consent between thralls and their masters, that it was a very bloody and horrific affair. And I'm not like, this is an adult's channel. I'm not going to hold back here, because I'm kind of tired of people turning around and saying, oh, this was a magical affair between the beautiful slave submitting to her master. It is not like that. Archaeology finds that we have, it's far from that. It is a very, very rough and hard relationship from beginning to end. You have innocent women from small, easily attacked villages, and like, these Vikings are not brave, they're not great warriors or men, because if they were, they would do what other warriors do and try to take on bigger forts, bigger kingdoms, make a real name out of themselves. These Vikings are not trying to make a name out of themselves. They're trying to be evil pirates, trying to make quick money and then use that money to drink themselves half silly. That's what these men are trying to do. And I highlight that. These are men trying to do that. Violent, horrible men that will go into small, not very well defended villages, violently kill the men there, grab the women by their head, have unconsensual ways with them in gangs, leave them in a bloody mess, then drag them into the boat, take them off in a boat, bring them to Dublin, and then sell them. And they sell them into the Icelandic world. Now, perhaps maybe in the Icelandic sagas they like to spice that up and say, oh, well, and maybe in Iceland they don't treat them so bad, but where they're coming from, which is the Dublin slave trade, it's bad. And we know that by the bone finds that we have. In fact, the bones are treated so badly, leprosy has broken out. We can find evidence of leprosy within the bones, which shows that women were shoved into small little confined areas together, huddled up, with Spanish slaves who were Spanish and Mediterranean slaves who were physically taken as well, shoved into a cage full of women from Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Slavic world, and of course Ireland and Britain, of course. Not just Irish slaves. There seems to be a thing of it was just Irish women constantly taken, and only Irish women, and that they had actually a loving relationship with their Scandinavian men. No. It's a violent, brutal world where women from all over were physically taken, shoved into cramped areas where leprosy then broke out amongst these women. Not one bit of it is consensual. So people online, even funny enough, I've come across academics, I'm not going to be naming names here, who believe that this was a loving, caring relationship. Okay. Enough said about that. Obviously, going back to the start, it does seem strange I keep going back to the start. It's just a lot happens at the very start, and this is kind of a lot of movie buffs have turned around and said that's sort of the magic of it, is that you have a lot that happens at the very start, and the movie never takes a step back. But then the pace of the movie really slows down, and it is 2 hours of him on a farm harassing the farmer. Anyway, regardless, back into it. The Berserker scene at the very start, a lot of people are turning around and looking at it from a very Norwegian point of view. And don't get me wrong, I don't think there's that much Irish literature in the entire movie. I do think he takes a lot from Scandinavian literature, perhaps a lot from Slavic literature as well. That's why I think people should look more into Slavic literature and not just narrow their head down into just Scandinavian literature alone. However, if we were going to take it from my perspective, which covers Celtic civilization and literature towards that, yes, at the very start of it, when we covered the Berserkers, they are very similar to the naked warriors that we would see in Northern Gaul, and the link we have between that and Ireland, which we refer to as Celtic culture. And the link we can see there is seen between the way we refer to a berserker, a man who takes off all of his clothes and goes into a rage. And a lot of people have said that this does not appear in Scandinavian literature. We do have them saying that they were naked in battle, which we also see in Irish literature. It means that person is not wearing any armor. And that, you can see from a military point of view, he's naked, he's got no armor. You have to wear armor or you're naked to attacks going inside your body, because like a piece of cloth, that makes no difference, so you might as well take your clothes off. However, in Irish literature, it must be noted that we do actually come across that in the Tán, a book I'll post there. Regardless, in that book, we do see people referencing Cuchulainn going into a spasm, into a rage, and in that he deforms and he changes and stuff, and that's kind of seen as a quote back into Celtic culture, which in a line formation, when you've got two lines going in and fighting each other, and then one line's trying to hold or trying to break the other side, and these are shield on shield wall fighting, and both sides are in battle, hacking away at each other, but both sides are always trying to break the other side so then they can flank and murder as many people as possible, and then surround them, and then when they're completely surrounded, hack up the last of them. That's the whole purpose of that. And in these tactics, you can see within earlier literature to do with the Romans, that the Gaul that live in the north of Italy remove their clothing so they can smash into the weaker lines of the Roman lines. And that way, once the line is broken, they can completely flank through. They do this by putting themselves into a spasm, removing their clothes, and then rushing into the lower classes, the peasants. They break into the peasants freak out, and they run away. And we can see that where at the very start of the movie, we can see these Norsemen removing their clothing, putting on animal clothing, and then rushing against the wall. And it's really, it looks way more like something out of the Finn cycle, where the Finn warband will also remove their clothing, put on animal clothing, and they themselves, the Finn, are known for going, we can know from the Tawn, Cuchulainn would go into a spasm. So it's interesting. It could be just coincidence. It really could be coincidence, and I'm open to people turning around blatantly and saying, "Oh, well, that's coincidence," because it's debatable, you know. And once again, that is the magic of this movie. As I've said before, you see the running theme over and over again of interpretation. It's your interpretation, and Robert Eggers said, "Look, it's your interpretation in the end of the day." And I just feel it's still more of Scandinavian literature than Celtic literature. Anyway, you guys were then asking about hurling. Yeah, we do see a very similar sport called Knocklicker. I've probably butchered that, but I'll post that up below. Anyway, yeah, it is super similar to hurling. I always find it funny when I'm going through all this academic work and people are like, "Oh, it's this sport, that sport," and it's like, how about you look at your neighbours? Hurling. It is very similar. Even the sticks that are used, if we look at the archaeology finds within the Hiberno Scandinavians, you can see a lot of them are buried with hurlings. And we clearly know that the likes of Cuchulainn, Finn McCool, they all reference back to hurling. So I can't see why there isn't similarities between the two. When we go through the rules themselves, it screams hurling again. Hurling throughout the whole thing. One thing I need to reference is, once again, I think it was Jackson Crawford or someone had pointed out and said that it was only played by the nobles. And yeah, going through the Irish literature as well, it's the same thing. It's the high peak, rich noble warriors like Cuchulainn that play hurling, and the elite Red Branch Knights that we see in 12th century literature. That really highlights the fact that, yeah, most likely he is right. It wouldn't have been played by slaves. The reason for that, again, is that the hurlings themselves, because they had to be made in a specific way, and on top of that, it was made by a really expensive oak, much more, more expensive than the slave themselves. And furthermore, this was training. The hurling, if you ever watch hurling and stuff, it's a rough sport because it's there to train rough, noble sons on how to be rough and ready. It's not there for the intelligent one that was going to be sent off to the priesthood, or the slave who was meant to be soft and weaker than the tough, strong noble. So yeah, I fully agree. I think hurling was there just for the rich nobles that could afford the wood oak and had someone who could carve it perfectly, so when they launched the ball into the air, it would easily go through the air to hit the ball and hit into the net. Rules are very similar into this as well. In the movie, it was a stick and a pole. Kind of disagree with that. I think they should have looked at the literature and then seen it back. This is why I don't think there is actually any Irish influence in here, because you can see the game being played from an interpretation, but it isn't being interpreted from any Irish sources. It's very much like, the chop gets cut there. The influences that you see between Icelandic and Irish sources are literally chopped. And you see that with not just a lot of media, but a lot of academics do that as well. They don't broaden their mind open and look at different sources to find the answers they're looking for. They're very much like, oh, well, Scandinavian sources belong in Scandinavia. Irish sources belong in the Celtic world. Because, as we know, the Norse and the Celts never mixed, so we can't look at different forms of literature. I'm not going there. I'll just have an academic on with far more information than I know. But Hiberno Scandinavian, I just thought maybe you should look at different sources. Anyway, that's beside the point. Do I see similarities between the two sports? I wouldn't call it hurley per se, because they're not calling it hurley. I would take a step back, look at the actual source of the sport, and then I would turn around and find similarities between Hurley that we see in early medieval and also archaeology sources that we can find, and make the similarities there. And I've looked at the two of them, and there's a lot of similarities there. Other than that, guys, oh yes, and leather outfits. People were talking about the leather outfits at the end with the Orkney men, picking them up and bringing them back. In Hiberno-Scandinavian literature, actually, in particular Irish literature, there is references to leather caps, leather hoods, and also leather blanketish stuff that goes over the hood to protect the hood from getting too wet and from people from getting soaked through. There's references to it, but we don't know what this looks like. We don't have any finds. So once again, as this movie keeps going over and over again, interpretation. So a lot of people were giving out about the leather at the very, very end. Yeah, most likely probably did if they're going back to the Orkneys, and the Orkneys is connected to the wider Hiberno-Scandinavian world, Hiberno-Scandinavian, Irish literature, and since we don't have a Dublin saga, we have a lot of gaps that need to be filled, and we can see similarities between the King's cycle and the Finn cycle, and obviously the Orkney sagas and the Icelandic sagas, so they do fill each other up in a way. So we can see that there, and I think if they're working on a boat and stuff and they're wearing leather and they don't want to get wet, it makes sense. Leather armor, still fully disagree with. I don't see too many leather armor being referenced. It's going to be riveted mail, which we did see plenty of, and I really, really love. And other than that, I could literally waffle all day, and thank God we've got another hour of this with Q&As on Sunday. But yeah, basically I could literally waffle about this all day. But thank God we have a Q&A on this coming up. So definitely listen to what I'm saying there. Come to my Q&A on the 22nd, which is going to be with Denton and also with Michael, where we're going to further expand on what I've just said here and then some. And we're going to do some Q&A. So ask your questions below. I'm still going to answer them, of course, but I'm also going to write them down and add them to the Q&A as well, if you don't mind. And bring your own questions as well. If you ask your question there and then, Michael will read them out. Myself and Denton have no problems holding the horses and reading out your question and stuff. Other than that, guys, I really hope you enjoyed. Please purchase the merchandise. It's what keeps the channel going. So thank you so much for all those that have purchased bits and bobs. Definitely follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the regular stuff as always. But other than that, thanks very much and all the best.